Hello everyone. In this video, I'm going to show you how to bring an asset that was textured in Substance 3D Painter and bring it into Unreal Engine. In Unreal, we'll go over the process of creating a material, setting up the emissive part of the material, we'll look at post-processing volumes, how to set up a lighting solution, how to create a camera, and how to create a high-resolution screen capture. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so we're in Substance 3D Painter and we have our asset all textured. So the next thing we want to do is export the textures. But before we do that, there's one thing I always check, and that's to make sure my normal format is the correct type for my render engine. So to do that, I'm going to go to Edit, Project Configuration, and just make sure my normal map format is set to DirectX because I'm going into Unreal Engine. Now, if I was going to something like Marmoset Toolbag, I would want OpenGL, but we want DirectX since we're going into Unreal Engine. The only difference is the direction of the Y channel or the green channel in our normal map, and you can flip those in Engine. So let's say I kick this out for Marmoset Toolbag, so I use OpenGL, I bring that map into Unreal Engine, I can easily go into that map and flip the green channel in my normal map. So it's not that big of a deal. But we want to make sure we're doing it correct and we understand that. So I'll hit OK. That's set up good. So I'll go to File, Export Textures, and there's a few things I got to set up here. First, the output directory. So I'll just put it in the default export location. So I'll make a new folder. So this, you could make this on your desktop. I'll call this one like Dragon Sword Texture Maps. And that's where we want to put them. So I'll hit select folder. The next thing I want to do is set my output template to Unreal Engine 4 Packed. Even though we're going into Unreal Engine 5, there's no difference. Like, they just haven't updated it, really. And by default, it should be like document channels. Just make sure you select Unreal Engine 4 Packed. File type, PNGs are fine. They're not as lossless as a JPEG, so normally for something simple like this, I'd just keep it a PNG. Yeah. Size. So right now, by default, it's using based on each of the texture set size, and that's set in here, right? Your texture set settings. So you can see here, I'm at 4K, but let's say I'm like, I don't need it at 4K. You can come here and set it to 2K, right? I did export for this demo 4K, but for this part, I'll just do 2K. You can set your padding settings here. I won't go too in depth about that, but this is where you can change like what's happening essentially between your UV islands, and that can be helpful, but beyond the scope for this demonstration. So let's go ahead and export. Another thing I just want to remind you is make sure you name your material in whatever 3D software that you create your asset in. So Lambert 1 is the default one in Maya. I should have called this like MAT_Dragon Sword or something like that. That's just helpful naming convention stuff. So I'll hit export. It's going to kick those maps out for me, and I get them, in a Windows directory like this. Okay, so I have my base color, I have my emissive map, I have my normal map, and this, you might not know what's going on here, but this is that packed map. So what's going on here is our ambient occlusion, our roughness, our metalness map. Those are all grayscale images. So since they don't have color information, they're just scale of white to black, you can actually pack each map into a different channel of a single image. So what do I mean by different channels? An image is made up of a red channel, green channel, and blue channel, and also an alpha channel, but that's beyond the scope for right now. So it's putting each map into one of those channels, and we'll see what that looks like when we get into Unreal. And speaking of Unreal, that's the next step. We want to open Unreal Engine. So let's open up Epic Game Launcher, make sure we're logged in, Unreal Engine, and we'll go to libraries. So I want to launch Unreal Engine 5.3. This is the latest one for when this video is being made. Should go pretty quick. Yeah, it's going pretty quick. The first time it kind of goes slow, and then after that it should go quick. Let's go to games. Let's make a blank project. Let's make sure starter content is in there. That just has a lot of like starter stuff that's helpful. And let's name our project Dragon Sword Demo. And so I'll create this, and what it's doing is it's making a directory for the game. So all a game is, when you're working on it anyway, is like a folder, and then inside there it has all your stuff that it needs for the game and whatnot. And then you can even see like the game's executable, well, not the executable game, but your project file for the game is right here as well. Okay. So this is Unreal Engine. And the first thing we want to do is make a new completely blank level. So because we like did a blank one with starter content, it has like this landscape. We do not need this. So I'm going to go to my content drawer, this button right here, and I want to make a new level. So I'll right click level, and I'll just call this one Dragon Sword Render. Okay. So we have to save this, or if you just double click it, save select it, it brings us into a truly completely blank level with no lights or anything like that. Okay. So in this blank level, now what we need to do is import our object. So let me bring up my directory again. And if I just bounce out, I have my dragon sword, and this is the same low poly model that I brought into Substance Painter. So I'm just going to drag that into Unreal. And I'm going to uncheck skeletal mesh. I'm going to go to advance. And something I want to do is, like, this sword is technically, like, the blade's broken up from the hilt and the handle and the pommel and all that. They're separate objects. I don't want to import it like that. I want to combine the mesh. But I won't check that so you guys can see what happens. I'll just hit import all without checking that. And then in my content browser, you can see it broke the sword up into like pieces. And that's not what I want to do. So I'll just shift select everything and delete them. Oops. Not the level. So I'll drag in my sword low poly object, and under skeletal mesh uncheck, make sure under advance we combine, and I'll hit import all. So we really want to be organized in our content browser. We can also dock it so it's up permanently. We want to be organized. So right now I'm just working in this content directory, so you can see all the starter content lives there. I'm just working like outside there. If you're working on a big game, obviously you want to be more organized, but I'm just going to throw everything right here for now. Let's go ahead and rename our material now. Let's get some good naming conventions. So call the material MAT Dragon Sword. So I always like try to name things the same. So if I have like thousands of materials in my game or whatever, I can just hit MAT in the search bar and that bring up all my materials, right? So having those kind of identifiers is a good thing to do. All right. So we got our object. Let's bring it into our level. I'll drop it. You can't see anything now because we don't have a light. So a cool trick is if you go to this icon right here, set it from lit to unlit. I'll hit F to zoom in. So I have the object selected and I hit F. And now I can see it. So I'll switch it back to lit. You can see the outline. Here's our outliner. So this is where our lights, our camera, and our objects are going to go. But that's a cool way to select things. And then each thing you select has information in the details panel, which is this right here. So translation, rotation, scale, our material that's assigned to this object, and a lot of other stuff. So let's go ahead and drop in a light so we can see what's going on. I'm going to come up to this icon right here. and go to lights and grab a skylight. So this is my icon for the skylight. You can see it was added in the outliner here as well. So what I need to do is right now it's using SLS captured scene, but what we want to do is switch this to specified cube map. You could download one online and set that up and plug it in. It's a little bit more work, but for now we're going to keep it simple, and we're going to use one of the HDRs that came with the starter content. So I like this daylight ambient cube map. So we'll click that. Notice how it rezzed up, or not rezzed up, excuse me, how it got brighter. That's because of something called automatic exposure control that's on by default. We'll circle back to that. But for right now, let's go ahead and just look at some of the settings. We can tweak the brightness intensity scale of our map. And so obviously we don't want to crank it up. So I set it to 1. And again, you can see that automatic exposure. And so when we're setting up our lights, we want to make sure that's not changing because it's hard to dial in the lighting. So we have that light. Now what I want to do is actually set up a post-processing volume and just turn that automatic exposure off. So I'll go to this icon again, go to volumes, and I'm looking for the post-processing volume right here. So it's this cube, and everything in this cube is going to have this stuff by default. Let me do... I think my asset is like a little bit smaller than real world settings, or a lot a bit smaller. So just make sure you scale your assets correctly before bringing them into Engine. Okay, so we have this let me turn snapping off. It's the wrong one. There we go. Nope, it's still... That's okay. There we go. Grid snapping. There we go. Okay, so we can see what this does. So in my post-processing volume, F is the focus. I'm going to look for my exposure, and I'm going to turn on metering mode, set it from auto to manual, and then I can hit exposure compensation, and I will set this to, let's try 15, and that kind of gets us a nice look. So it only happens when you're in this box. So what I need to also do is set the box to infinite. So I just type in infinite instead of scrolling through all the settings, and I'll click this checkbox here. And now it's infinitely bound. So now I'm not getting that automatic, and I can move it out of the way because it's kind of annoying. So obviously that's too bright. So in my post-processing volume, we want to set this maybe down to 12. That looks pretty good, and we can see what's going on. Maybe 13. We'll come back and dial in the lighting. This is just so I can see my material. Okay, so we got rid of the auto exposure. We got a skylight in there so we can see our basics materials. So let's actually start diving into the material aspect of things. So here's our material that we're going to edit. It's already assigned to our object by default when we brought it in. But if not, you can right click, create a new material. I'll just keep it new material and plug it in here, and you can see it updated on our model. Obviously, we don't want to do that though, because that's the material we want. So let's go out to Windows Explorer and navigate to our textures, right? I want to select our 4 textures, and I'll just bring them in here. Normally, I'd make a folder, call it like texture maps, but again, this is a simple demo, so I'm just keeping everything right here. All right, so I have my base color, my emissive, my normal, and then my packed. I call it MOR, Metalness, Occlusion, Roughness. ORM, any way works, I guess. But let's take a look at what's going on in this map, since this is the one you might be least familiar with. So I'll double click, and it looks like really funky, right? A couple things you need to make sure when you import this map. So because it's like combining those channels, sometimes it will look like a normal map, and Unreal will try to import it as a normal map. So what we want to make sure is that compression settings on this texture is set to default. Sometimes it might come in like this, because it thought it was a normal map, so it applied this to it. But we want to make sure it's set to default. Also, sometimes this will come in with sRGB checked. And what Unreal is trying to do is it thinks it's a color map, and it's trying to color correct it. So it's going to throw your roughness, metalness, and ambient occlusion values out of whack, because it's adjusting them. And so if your roughness looks like, mainly if your object looks like really wet and it's not supposed to, make sure you're checking this. I always check this stuff just in case. But really make sure you're checking sRGB and make sure it's unchecked, because we do not want to apply any color correction, right? So let's see what's going on. So you can see all three channels are activated, but if I turn them off and I turn on the blue channel, this is our metalness map. Since I did something stylized, it's not like pure 100% metal, non-metal, to give it the look I want it. But basically everything that's black, non-metal, skewing toward white, it's going to be metallic. Here's my roughness and my ambient occlusion. So you can see how it packed all three of those into one channel, or one image, excuse me. Okay, so once that's good, we're going to hit save. So that texture should be good to plug in. We should not get any issues. Let's open our material, and we'll have our content browser open so it's easy to drag stuff. So we don't need this, so I'm going to delete it. And we'll start setting up our material. The first one we'll plug in is base color. That's the easiest, right? So we'll get our object kind of in frame. Having multiple monitors is nice. But obviously I'm recording, so I can't utilize them. But this should work fine. All right. So here's our base color. So it comes in as a texture sample node. We'll plug that into base color, and I'll hit save. Anytime you make an adjustment in the material, you have to save it to see it reflected in your scene. Okay? So next, let's get the normal map. And you will notice the normal map does look different. This is like that change that it's applying, because if we look at the texture, it's a normal map. Unreal's like, okay, this is a normal map. So it's doing its Unreal stuff to it. Let's go ahead and plug in our normal map and save. And we don't really see anything. That's because we don't have like reflections and stuff really in there. So let's grab that packed map. Okay? So remember, if you need to look at it, you can see B, metalness, your green channel, that's your roughness, and then your R channel, that's your ambient occlusion, okay? So blue, metallic, green, roughness, red, ambient occlusion. So you can see how we're pulling those channels out from this texture sample, plugging them in. So I will hit save, and now that's looking good. So that's how we set up the material. Let's go ahead and set up the lighting, and then we'll come back and look at how we can set up the emissive material. So for the lighting, actually what I want to do is set up a backdrop, I think. That will just help, so you're not staring in this black void. Let's go ahead and make sure we save this and minimize. Hit F to focus, and let's go ahead. Am I still in unlit mode? No, I'm in lit. Oh, this is good to show. So if you ever like are zooming in, it's because my object's like really tiny, right? Scale is super important. but this is actually good. So what I can do is in the console, I can type in, I think it's clipping, near, it's near clip. So R set near clip plane, and I'll just turn that off. And that's how you fix that issue. So that's kind of handy that that happened, in case you run into that issue. So let's go ahead and set up our scene. I'm going to move my content browser out of the way for now. Let's go ahead and rotate our object. So let's go ahead and position it. I always like to give it a dynamic pose. Something like that. And let's create a backdrop. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to do a really simple one. We can go to Shapes, Plane, and we can rotate that. Let's just zero it out. Should have probably zeroed out my object too in the location. So let's actually go ahead and do that now. That's good practice. And go to our dragon sword. 0, 0, 0. There we go. So we're at origin. Grid's a little bit annoying, so I'll just move them up. Move this back. And let's scale our backdrop up to like 50, 50, and 50. Okay, so our lighting is really flat right now because it's only utilizing that skylight. It's pretty blue as well. So let's go to our skylight. If we do like a 2, and again, we want this to be more like a fill light. But yeah. So when I'm lighting my scene, that's how you set up the backdrop, right? Just so we have something of interesting. We can always come in here and dial in the material too if you want to do that. Let's get the lighting first, and then we'll come back and tweak the backdrop material, I think. So let's hide the skylight for now. And I'm going to go back to this icon, drop in a spotlight. And let's just zero out the location so it's closer to our origin. Oops. Yeah, that's my bad. My object's just really tiny. So we're going to have low light values. This object doesn't really need... Sometimes if you're doing like really realistic stuff, you're going to want to have like that skylight in there for sure. To have something nice to reflect off of the metals especially. But for something more stylized, I think what we might be able to do is use our point lights. I'm not going to go too deep into the lights. But let's see if we can get something. So what I'm looking for is this light is like kind of coming from the top. It's too bright, so let's go to our spotlight. Let's dial down the intensity to like 1. Let's crank it up a little bit more, 1.5. Maybe a lot bit more, 3. And we can also play with like the color. The attenuation radius is something we can play with as well. Kind of like that. We have this inner cone and outer cone, so that can control like the fall off. So that's something cool to play with. So I'm going to actually make that inner cone pretty bright. But I want the attenuation radius to come down. It could be a cool light to play with. We also have like the source radius and stuff too. I don't play with that too much. Sometimes you might see some stair stepping in your shadow, so you might play with the source radius a little bit. You might play with the shadow bias. But yeah, I think the main thing is just the intensity. So let's do Let's do 2, see what that looks like. It's still pretty bright, so I'm gonna do 0.5. Okay. That's looking good. So we can add as many lights as we need to make this look good. I want to try to keep this pretty quick. So let's I always take so long to light stuff because it's a really important part that gets overlooked. But let's do another light real quick. Zero out the origin, so it's close by. See, we got that bloom we're getting. We'll dial that back when we check post-processing. So this is going to be like my fill light. We could also see what like the obviously that's way too intense. We just got to dial it back. We could also see what the skylight does. That doesn't look too bad. Let me check my material. Yeah, that's right. Okay. Yeah, I think it's just the skylight. Okay, let's drop the intensity of my second spotlight down to 2, maybe 1. 0.5. There we go. Okay, now we're getting this nice lighting. And then again, we can take time to like play with like the attenuation radius. Maybe this one has like hue to it. We don't want to go, I typically don't go too extreme. But maybe we add some warmth to this light. Bring the saturation down a bit. So that's kind of acting like a nice fill light. Let's kind of move it so I don't see the shadow. And the last thing I'm going to do, we'll keep the lighting simple. You can add point lights and stuff to highlight areas, which is a nice technique. But I think I really want a rim light to really separate it from the background. Also, I want this to actually brighten more of it. Okay, cool. One more light. Normally I use like all different types of lights. You can experiment with these, obviously. For production rendering, I a lot of times use like rectangle lights, point lights to accentuate certain areas. I don't really use directional lights too much, but sometimes that can give you a good place to start. It doesn't really matter where it is in the map. It just the direction it's pointing is what's important. But sometimes, depending on my asset, I can get a nice nice rim light. But I think because I have my backdrop, it's not gonna work. So let's just go ahead and make one more spotlight. And oh, I already did. So we don't need this fourth one. So delete that. I'm gonna call this one right click, rename. Oops, you don't right click, you just double click it in the right spot. Forgot. There we go. We'll call this one spotlight underscore rim. So we'll left click. This one will be our. This is basically like acting like our fill light. And this one is our key. All right, so let's get our rim light. Typically put it behind the object. That's actually not looking too bad. It's still pretty bright. Really want it to hit the sword. It's not right now. We might need to bring it up and rotate it down. All right, sorry about that. I kind of skipped ahead. I tweaked the lighting a little bit. The main thing I did was get rid of like the cast shadow that was being caused by the fill light. I just adjusted that a little bit. Really what I'm looking for when I'm setting up lighting most of the time is I'm really using the light to give me a good sense of depth of the object. So that's like how this plane of the hilt is brighter than this side, right? So that's giving it depth. You can see the pommel too. Like we have brighter values on this side. It's darker here. We can see the roundness in there by the light fall off. We can see how the rim light is separating our object from the backdrop. So that's what I'm really looking for is adding. How can I use my lights to add depth to my object, right? Let's go ahead and select our plane. And let's just tweak that material real quick. I'll set the roughness to 1. Let's go ahead and, since this is stylized, let's go ahead and kind of give it a cool... something a bit more interesting, essentially. This could be cool. We'll keep that for now. We might adjust it later. I don't like that. Let's get some darker, maybe. And more blue. Yeah. Okay. That looks pretty cool. I'm gonna tone down the rim light a smidge. Let's do 2. See what that does. 1.5. Let's do 1. I think that's good. Let's do 1.5. Okay, now I'm gonna be done with the lighting. So yeah, so we got something that feels more whimsical, it's more stylized, so this is looking good. So let's jump back and go to our emissive material. So I'll go to my Dragon Sword material, and with this, I'm also going to show you how we can use like blueprints to kind of help us really dial some stuff in, and I'll show you material instances, which is awesome. So what I'm going to do is I'll grab this emissive material, right? Now, you could just plug your emissive map into the emissive slot, right? Save it. Voila, right? That looks pretty weak for a glow, right? So this is the nice thing about blueprints. What we can do is we can pull out a node, or if you hit tab, that brings us up the search thing for a node. And I want a multiply. So instead of plugging this directly into the emissive channel, I'm going to take my map, plug it into multiply A, take multiply, and plug it into the emissive. Nothing really changed because we're not multiplying by anything. We're multiplying by 1, so it's just going to be that. So what we can do is we can bring out a constant. So this is just the value. So in our B, if we have this set to 0, we save it, it's dark. We don't want that. So I'm going to actually set this to something insane like 500, and then we'll really see what's going on. So hit save, and you can see how bright that is now, okay? Let's go ahead and set it back to 1 for now, and I'll show you how we can take this a step further. I want a 3 vector, so if I type 3, constant 3 vector, this gives me like a color swatch essentially. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take our emissive map, and I'll get another multiply node, and we will multiply our texture, our emissive texture, by this constant 3 vector or color. So right now, I think if I hit save, it should be pretty much black because that's the color we want, or that it's on. If we set this to white, should be our normal. But what we can do is start playing with the saturation of the colors. So now, if I save that, it's multiplying, so it's not going to be a 1-for-1. But you can start tweaking the color, which is pretty awesome. So not only do we have control over the intensity, we have control over the color of our emissive map. And that's really awesome. And if we had more time, we could like set up so we can tweak like even our roughness map to tweak the contrast and whatnot to really dial that in. So you don't always have to jump back into Substance Painter for adjustments like this. We can really use the shader node or the blueprints in Unreal. So let's go ahead and set this to white, 100, hit OK. So save. This is going to be our default look. So what I'm going to do is something even cooler. So you can see how I had to keep going up to save, right? Now I'm going to create a material instance, and that's going to basically take this blueprint. I'm going to create parameters that we can adjust, and it will adjust in real time on the fly. So to do that, I need to right-click what I want to be able to change. So I'll right-click our constant 3 vector, convert to parameter. I'll name it emissive color. Oops. Here, emissive color. And this will be our emissive intensity. So we need to right-click, convert to parameter, emissive intensity. Just capitalize that I. Okay. So how, oops, I don't know how I made that, delete. So how do we utilize this? Okay, let's first off save it. So in our content browser, and this is what you really want to do anyway, you want to have like your master shader, and then you always want to actually apply a material instance to the object. So I'll right click, create material instance, and it should be just Dragon Sword, INST for instance. We don't need this anymore. Let's go ahead and close that. And so when I click on the material instance, it's different now. Now we can only access those exposed parameters, okay? So what I'm going to do is select our object, and that's the base master material. And what I want to do is plug the instance in there. And so in the instance, what I can do is enable emissive intensity, and you will see it adjust on the fly. Enable emissive color, it's going to adjust on the fly. Okay? Really, really cool technique we can utilize. And it's like multiplying, so it's not like 1-for-1 changing the color. If I was like thinking about it, I would have just made the emissive map white, and then when you multiply like your color swatch, it would be like that true color. So right now it's like multiplying that blue with, that's why you can't, it's hard to get like true red. You have to be pretty saturated because it's multiplying these colors on top of that blue. But it's still a cool concept. It still translates. So yeah, that's a material instance. That's our emissive map, and that's how we can create controllable parameters. So actually, let's dial that in. I think we can get something a little bit more interesting. I was really liking kind of that's fine. Maybe green. Green's cool. We'll do green. Spell kind of feels like spell. So, and then I'll save it. Close that out. But that's really nice. You can see those adjustments on the fly. Honestly, blue would probably tie it in better, but we'll just leave it for the sake of this demo. Okay. So the next thing we need to look at, we still got to look at cameras and post-processing volumes. So we will set up our camera next. And to do that, I have this kind of positioned already in a way I liked. I was working with the lighting in this. I probably should have set my camera up first and then tweak the lighting. But what I can do is, I like this position. I'll come here and I'll create camera here. You could use a cinematic camera actor. You kind of have to understand aperture, shutter speed, and some other things and how they control blurriness and depth of field and all that. So we'll keep it simple. We use camera actor. So I'll hit that. And what that did is it created camera based on my position. So the cool thing is I can pin this right here, and this is why it would have been useful to work on lighting, because I can like rotate this around, but it's keeping my camera angle, right? I always lock my camera too once I get it. So I can go into my camera by going to perspective, camera actor 1, and so I'm in my camera view now. So I can rotate it. So maybe I need to dial it in like a little bit, but it was pretty good. But yeah. So once I hate F on this. So I just blubbed it up. That's okay. Get our position back. All right. So I'm in my camera. If I need to bump out of my camera, I just hit this eject button. Boom. I select my camera here, my outliner, and it brings it up here, and you can pin it. To lock my camera so I can't move it when I'm in full mode, I'll right-click my camera, go to transforms, lock actor movement, and now I can't wiggle it when I'm in that view. So that's helpful. So that's the camera. Pretty easy. That's all we're going to do with that. We're going to use the post-processing volume to control a lot of cool things you can do in the camera, especially if you use like a cinematic camera actor. So next, let's look at post-processing volume. So select our post-processing volume, and we'll go through some of these, not all of these, but let's see what we can do. So the first one, we have, I don't think we want mobile depth of field. So yeah, let's just look at bloom. So I'll check the method, standards, fine, click intensity, and we can control the intensity of our bloom. So let's say we want the runes to be like pretty bright. We can also enable threshold and like dial that in. So it's like what is getting the intensity of the bloom. So you really want to be a little bit sparing with it. Don't want to go too crazy. So I think this is pretty good. You're getting nice bloom on the runes, and you're getting this nice reflection, a subtle bloom on the metal as well. So that's bloom. A lot of post-processing things you just want to keep minimal. You don't want to go too crazy unless you're going for a specific look. We already kind of did manual exposure, so we're locked in, so we could dial in our lights. So we don't need to look at exposure. Some people use chromatic abrasion for like realistic things. Obviously this is too crazy, but if you're doing like something realistic, maybe you have like a very small amount of chromatic abrasion. Dirt mask. So I'm not going to use this, but I want to show it off because it's really cool. So if I check dirt mask texture and I use like one of, let's just use this one, and dirt mask intensity. Let's use this one. You can see it's like applying this over my camera. I think this one would be a better one to showcase. Hold on. That's okay. Can't find it now. But yeah, you can like see how you can play with that. So you could get like dirt buildup in the corners or lint scratches or particles, you know. So this is a really cool feature that you can play with. Oh, something else. You can do that stuff in the camera. You can play with local exposure. Lens flare is something else you might play with. Obviously, if I ever use lens flare, I'm like really, really subtle with it. Like that's still too much. So maybe something like that, right? But you can get really cool lens flare effects. Depth of field, again, something I would be careful with. So let's choose our focal distance. Again, our object is like tiny, so our tolerances are really small. So let this be a lesson why you want to scale your objects correctly. So I'm not going to be able to get like, it has to be like a 5 maybe, or 1.5 to dial in that focal plane. But this is something you can mess with. To get really nice depth of field. So that's something I'll play with a lot of the time. You can play with like all this color correction stuff too. So right now, let's do. So you can play with like a lot of this stuff to get some cool effects and whatnot. But there's a lot to go through, like for color grading. So you can play with all that stuff. And the last thing I want to show, I'll just type it in here. I can never find it. Is the vignette. I'll oftentimes use the vignette to kind of focus the viewer in on the middle. That's pretty cool. And so those are post-processing things. The last thing, I'll go back to the camera. I kind of forgot to mention. We can play with, let's clear that, the the field of view. So if you want something to look more orthographic, you crank that field of view down. Oops, and I locked my camera, right? So transform, unlock. And so now that's having like a more orthographic look. And then if you crank this up, you need to get closer, but then you're getting a more distorted view, right? So maybe something like 35 wouldn't be too bad for this object. Wish I had made this the correct size so I could get some nice depth of field on that horn. But other than that, I think this is looking good. So we have it. We have the lights, the materials, the backdrop, everything looks good. So now we're ready to create our render. So what we'll do is we'll go to this icon right here next to perspective, high resolution screenshot, and hit capture. And it will open this directory right here. You can click on that, or you can navigate to it. And here's our high resolution screenshot. So we have our rendered image. And that's all there is to it. One last thing, if you're really new to Unreal, just make sure you're saving your level and make sure you're saving all your content, right? So like these icons right here means this wasn't saved. So if I right click and just save it, you see that star go away. You can see this is my level, it has a star, so this stuff's not saved. So you can like just go to file, save, save all, and that's good. Also, remember when you open your project again, it's going to default open at that landscape level. So you'll have to go to your content browser and navigate, to where you saved that level. So I can show you real quick. If I just make a new level, go in there, make sure you save all that stuff. So this is like, pretend this is that default level. So you'll just want to come into your content browser, navigate to the level that you saved it in, open it, and then you can navigate back to that camera. And it looks like I didn't delete my skylight, so it's back on. So I'll just hide that, and it's back to normal. So we can either delete our skylight, or if you want it off permanently, you go to the details panel, and I think if you type visible, you just check that off, and so it won't be visible even if it's on. So 2 ways to do that. So I hope you found this tutorial helpful, and I will see you next time. Have a great one.